So what I want to think about today is the collect for today that we're going to hear a little bit later in the service. And the collect has this phrase, we ask for prayer and help to follow daily in the blessed steps of Jesus' most holy life. And I wanted to think about what it means to follow in the steps of Jesus' most holy life. It's something that we are called to do as Christians, and I think it bears some thought, as it's not always an easy journey. What gets in the way very often are divisions that separate us. Divisions that exist and are real, and divisions that we manufacture or that we see and judge to be real. And those divisions break apart our understanding of each other's humanity. And it's very important, I think, to remember that this, I don't believe, is how God sees us. But it is a very human experience to see others as different from ourselves. And in doing so, making a judgment. Now, sometimes that can be cultural, sometimes it can be geographic, sometimes it can be born out of our upbringing, our families, our experiences, a whole number of factors. But my favorite story about how people see things differently comes from one of Charles Kuralt's books. In fact, it was his last book before he died. And as you know, he was a great travel writer. And for his last book, he took a year, and for the 12 months of that year, he went to 12 of his favorite places in the United States. And he went to places that you would expect, such as San Francisco or New Orleans, New York. But he also, of course, went to Charleston, South Carolina. And the first night in Charleston, he was staying with a friend of his for that month, and they were having dinner together. And his friend said, "You know, Charles, the first thing you have to understand about Charleston is it's unlike any other place in the United States, or for that matter, the world." And Charles Kuralt said, "Well, with all due respect, Robert, you have to understand that's how everyone feels about their hometown." And he said, "No, I'll tell you a story that shows how different Charleston is from everywhere else." And he said, "What's a common practice in Charleston with the big families that own the big houses along the Battery that go back a long way in Charleston's history, sometimes they have a little trouble financially keeping up those houses. So what they do is they rent them out to some rich Yankee family for a couple of years, and that pays for 10 years of maintenance. And while the tenant is in the big house, the owners of the property move usually into the carriage house in the back, and that's how they manage to keep hold of these houses." And he said one of the most beautiful houses and biggest houses was owned by a woman named Mrs. Rhett. Mrs. Rhett had rented her big house to a family from New York. And one night the phone rang at Mrs. Rhett's house, and she picked it up, and it was the tenant. And they said, "Mrs. Rhett, we want to tell you how much we adore being in the house. It's just sublime. And as you know, we have a lot of friends who come visit us, and we're entertaining a great deal. And we couldn't help but notice that the kitchen is a little antiquated. And with your kind permission, we'd like to have you meet with our architect, and we will pay to have the kitchen completely renovated." And there was dead silence, and then Mrs. Rhett said, "You mean to tell me you went in the kitchen?" We see things differently in different places. And those divisions that separate us are also in today's readings. The references to things that divide us are there. In the Jewish Testament, you have the story of Joseph, and there are deep divisions, as we've heard in the last few weeks, in Joseph's family, his brothers trying to destroy him. And now there's a moment of reconciliation. And in order to preserve the Jewish people, Joseph preserves his family and invites them to come to Egypt, dividing them from their place where they've lived, coming to this new place where they will have enough to eat in this time of famine. And then in Paul's letter to the Romans, Paul makes it clear that the divisions that are already emerging between traditional Judaism and those who are following Jesus do not negate Judaism. And so in his mind, the divisions that have begun to emerge are not meant to separate us from God's love. That the Jewish people are still the people of God, even though they are now divided from this other group who are now seeing Jesus as the Messiah. And then you come to the most troubling and I think challenging story in today's readings, and that is from St. Matthew. And it starts off with Jesus teaching about what divides the Jewish people in terms of dietary and sanitary law from the rest of the pagan world. And they keep very strict dietary and sanitary instructions and codes and laws, and that divides or separates them from others. And Jesus is saying, it isn't that so much that seems so important that divides us. It's actually the things that you say that come out of your heart and that you do that divide us. And we're not meant to be divided. So far, so good. And if we're following the steps of Jesus, then he takes us a little further in the second part of the story, and I think a little bit more complicated way of following Jesus. Because if you feel that Jesus is being harsh and dismissive of the Canaanite woman, you're right. And what's behind that rejection is a long history of animosity and division. The Canaanites were the original occupiers of the land that became Israel. And in pushing the Canaanites out, the Jewish people also demonized the Canaanites. They told stories about them being the most horrible people imaginable, guilty of child sacrifice and even cannibalism. And so that division between these pagan Canaanites and the Jewish people of Israel is very deep and profound. And in this story that we have from St. Matthew, you have a Canaanite woman who comes up to Jesus, and he's geographically out of his comfort zone. He's in a pagan area, and the Canaanite woman has the temerity to approach Jesus, something that really is unthinkable and unseemly. And so the disciples say, please get rid of her. She's yelling at us. And Jesus says, I have come just to serve the people of Israel, dismissing the woman who is not Jewish. But she comes in front of Jesus and kneels in front of him. She literally blocks his way and says, Lord, help me. And he says, it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to a dog. And these harsh words, these dismissive words, do not put the woman off. And she says, yes, that's true, but there are even crumbs from the master's table. I'll be satisfied with that. And then Jesus says, woman, great is your faith. Let it be done to you as you wish. And her daughter was healed instantly. Jesus, I think, in this story, is showing an arc of growth. And I want to put forward this morning the thought that probably an earlier century would have had me burned at the stake. But I want to put forth the idea that Jesus is certainly the Son of God. Jesus embodies all of our understanding of the divine that we know as Christians. But I do not believe that Jesus was perfect in every single way and simply went through the motions of being human. We are challenged in our understanding of Jesus to see Jesus as human as well as divine. And in Jesus' true humanity, I think he has growth in his life and his understanding and in his knowledge of the divine. I don't think Jesus is fully formed, fully perfect from the moment of conception, but instead comes to an understanding as his life proceeds. And that's a profound understanding, a profound way of understanding God and God's nature and God's relationship with us. But I don't think it was a perfect journey. I think that there were missteps and times were hard to understand the depth of God's love. Now I'm going to take a little sidebar and tell you a story about dogs and crumbs. When we were on vacation last week, we took our beloved dog, and the highlight of the vacation for him and for us is to take him swimming in a lake nearby our house every day. And he would do it for 10 hours going straight if he could. And we took him swimming, we dried him off when we got home, and of course we were careful about his retriever ears, that they were dry, but unfortunately he got an ear infection while he was gone. And the vet said, well, all you have to do is take these antibiotic drops for 7 days, twice a day, and drop them into his ear. I have to tell you that that is a tough thing to do with our dog. It's resulted in Tim and I having some of our most vocal arguments that I can remember. The dog is now convinced that we're trying to kill him, and it involves a wrestling match that is not helped by the crumbs that fall from the table. Because in order to distract him, we've prepared a bounty of feasts of steak and hamburger and bacon, which he very gladly eats, having shaken off all the antibiotic, usually onto us, and continued on. He's getting better, but I'm not quite sure it's the antibiotic. And those bitter medicine, that resistance to taking what will help him, is not unlike the way that we come to understanding God more fully. We have to go against our human nature, if you will, that leads us to make judgments and divisions between people, to see people as other and not us. And that's a human capacity, and it's meant to be resisted. And for my money, having Jesus be someone who also learns the importance of overcoming division, overcoming judgments based on culture, religion, practices, is a profound lesson not only in how God sees the world and us, but the hope that if Jesus can struggle with that, I can as well. It's an invitation to be intentional, to struggle in the steps that Jesus way, in the way of Jesus, that isn't necessarily easy for us, and I would maintain at times it wasn't easy for him. But I like a Messiah that walks with me in that path, that I follow in the steps of Jesus, not trying to achieve perfection, but understanding a companion is with me on the way. Someone who has known the struggles I know. Someone who behaves the way I behave at times. And although Jesus came to a much more profound and deep understanding of the divine than I ever could, it's heartening to know that I too, in following Jesus, am walking the same path. So as we struggle to overcome our understanding of people as being so different from ourselves, and in that such a different way in which God sees us as one, it's helpful to me to know that I'm not alone in that path. I'm not alone in our community, the way that we struggle to understand ways that we can be more open and accepting and inclusive, that we can see people the way God sees us, but also that Jesus himself is a guide, a companion, a friend on the way. And with that companionship, with that love, I think I'm headed, although fitfully, in the right direction. Amen.